LaRue crouched low in the underbrush, his slender silver fingers trembling as they gripped the edge of a jagged rock. His large, shimmering eyes scanned the forest ahead, every shadow and movement a potential threat. He barely dared to breathe. His ears twitched, alert for the faintest sound of approaching danger. The jungle canopy of Kura's End, once filled with the songs of his people, was now eerily silent. Nothing but the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of Terran patrol ships slicing through the sky. His kind were gone, all of them. Only he remained, the last of the Erlon. LaRue had been on the run for weeks, surviving off scraps, hiding in hollowed-out tree trunks, using what little energy he had left to mask his presence from the Terran hunters. He hadn't slept in days. The pursuit had been relentless since Corax, the Terran queen, declared her imperial decree to eradicate the Erlon race. They didn't just want him dead. No, Corax had something far worse in mind. Rumors whispered of twisted experiments, mutilation, and enslavement. The Terrans saw the Erlon's telepathic powers as both a threat and a weapon, something to be dissected, replicated, controlled. LaRue shuddered, the thought of being captured twisting his stomach into knots. He had seen it happen before, to his family, his friends. His heart ached with the weight of their screams, their final thoughts burning in his mind. He couldn't let that be his fate. But how much longer could he evade them? A distant snap of branches made LaRue's heart race. He flattened himself against the forest floor, his skin blending with the soft silver leaves scattered around him. His breathing grew shallow as he listened. 3 Terran soldiers, heavily armed, their rough voices carrying through the stillness of the jungle. "He's close, I can feel it," one of them growled, his tone laced with eager anticipation. LaRue's pulse quickened. He could feel them too, predators hunting him with the precision of a pack closing in on its prey. Their brutish reptilian forms cut through the thick undergrowth, their red eyes glowing ominously in the dim twilight of the forest. "He won't escape this time," snarled another, cracking his energy whip in the air. The sharp sound echoed like a thunderclap, sending a shiver down LaRue's spine. The soldiers stopped only a few meters from LaRue's hiding place. He could feel the vibration of their heavy boots against the ground. His fragile body quivered with exhaustion, but his mind was sharp, his telepathic senses honed to a razor's edge. One of the soldiers pulled out a scanner, sweeping the area. LaRue bit his lip, willing his body to remain still, even as his limbs screamed in protest. Nothing. "Damn, these little vermin can hide well," one of them cursed, his voice laced with frustration. The scanner emitted a soft beep, and LaRue's blood ran cold. They were honing in on his position. If they found him, there would be no escape. He could feel the icy grip of fear clawing at his mind, threatening to overtake him. His powers were fading, his connection to the forest weakening. Once he could have called upon the trees and vines to hide him, shield him, but now even the plants felt foreign. He was a ghost in the land that once welcomed him. The last heartbeat in a world turned to ash. And then suddenly, from the sky above came a new sound, a low hum, followed by the roar of thrusters. LaRue's wide eyes shot upward, scanning the gaps in the jungle canopy as a ship descended, its hull gleaming against the setting suns. The Terran soldiers were momentarily distracted, their weapons drawn as they turned to face the new arrival. The ship was small, not one of theirs. It had a patched-together look, with worn-out engines and scorched metal plating. Definitely not Terran design. LaRue's mind raced. Who would be reckless enough to land in a Terran-controlled zone? Was this a new threat, or had fate decided to throw him a lifeline in his final hour? The ship landed with a heavy thud, the dust swirling around it. The Terran soldiers advanced, weapons ready to tear apart whatever, or whoever, had dared to interrupt their hunt. The door to the ship hissed open, revealing a single figure silhouetted against the fading light. LaRue blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The figure stepped forward, her outline slowly coming into focus. A human? What was a human doing here? She couldn't have been more than 20, her youthful face framed by messy brown hair tied back in a hurried knot. Her clothes were worn, patched in places, but functional, clearly not a soldier's uniform. In her hands, she held a pulse rifle, though by the way it trembled in her grip, LaRue could tell she wasn't used to wielding it. The Terran soldiers sneered, clearly unimpressed. "What's this?" one of them barked. "A human? You lost, little girl?" The human took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling as if gathering the courage to stand her ground. "I'm not lost," she said, her voice louder than LaRue expected, though it wavered at the edges. "I know what you're doing, and I'm here to stop it." The Terran leader, a brutish figure with scales like blackened steel, chuckled darkly. "Is that so?" He took a menacing step toward her, brandishing his energy whip. "Do you even know who you're dealing with, human?" For a moment, LaRue thought the girl might turn and flee. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable. But then she straightened her back, her grip on the pulse rifle tightening. "I know exactly what you are," she spat, "and I'm not letting you take that creature." LaRue's heart skipped a beat. She had seen him. The Terran leader snarled, raising his whip. "You've just signed your death warrant." Before he could strike, the girl fired. The pulse rifle kicked back in her hands, and a bolt of energy shot toward the Terran leader, striking him square in the chest. He stumbled backward, more out of surprise than injury, but it was enough to make the other soldiers hesitate. Seizing the moment, LaRue's instincts kicked in. His telepathic abilities flared, weak but still potent. He reached out with his mind, flooding the Terran soldiers with images of confusion and chaos, distorted visions of the jungle shifting, moving, warping. The soldiers recoiled, momentarily disoriented. The girl fired again, this time hitting one of the other soldiers in the leg. He howled in pain, collapsing to the ground. The third soldier, now unnerved, began retreating, barking orders into his comm unit. "We need backup, now!" LaRue knew their time was running out. Reinforcements would arrive soon, and they'd both be doomed. His body trembled with exhaustion, but he managed to crawl forward, emerging from the underbrush and into the clearing. The human girl's eyes widened as she saw him up close. For a brief moment, they locked eyes, her confused, terrified gaze meeting his pleading one. "Come on," she shouted, rushing toward him. She grabbed his arm, lifting him to his feet with surprising strength. "We have to get out of here." LaRue nodded weakly, his legs barely able to support his weight. He felt her determination, her will to fight, and it gave him just enough strength to move. Together they stumbled toward the girl's ship as the Terran soldiers regained their senses. Pulse fire whizzed past them, narrowly missing their heads as they dove into the ship's open hatch. The door slammed shut, and the ship's engines roared to life. LaRue collapsed onto the cold metal floor, his vision blurring as the last of his energy drained away. The girl frantically punched coordinates into the ship's navigation system, her face pale and sweat-drenched. As the ship shot into the sky, leaving Kuraz End and the pursuing Terran soldiers behind, LaRue let out a shaky breath. For the first time in weeks, he felt a flicker of hope. He had no idea who this human was or why she had saved him. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He wasn't alone anymore. The freighter rattled violently as it ascended through Kuraz's toxic atmosphere. Alira Jones gripped the controls tighter than she ever had before, her knuckles turning white. She was no ace pilot, just a maintenance tech, but she had enough flying experience to keep this rust bucket from falling apart. Behind her, the small, silver-skinned alien she'd just rescued lay slumped in the co-pilot's seat, his breaths shallow and labored. Alira cast a quick glance over at him, her mind still racing to comprehend what had just happened. How had she ended up here? Just days ago, she was in a different part of the galaxy, part of a routine maintenance crew fixing satellite arrays for the Earth Galactic Coalition. This wasn't the plan at all. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath, pulling hard on the controls to avoid the dense cloud formations ahead. The ship rattled in protest. Alira cursed again. The old freighter wasn't made for this kind of rapid escape. The engine was overheating, warning lights blinking across the dashboard. She glanced at the ship's navigation screen. The Terran capital ships hadn't deployed yet, but it was only a matter of time. Right now, they had smaller patrol ships on their tail, Predator drones, no doubt sent to finish the job. What am I doing here? The question buzzed in her mind, louder than the ship's alarms. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't a hero. She was just Alira, a girl from Earth, a tech who fixed things, not someone who went around fighting empires or rescuing aliens. But then her eyes flicked back to the small creature beside her. He was curled up in the seat, his fragile body trembling. He looked so small, so helpless. His silver skin had dulled to an almost grayish hue, and his large eyes, which had been filled with fear and pain, were now closed in exhaustion. What was I supposed to do? Leave him to be captured? Enslaved? Worse? No. Alira's gut twisted at the thought. She wasn't sure why, but something inside her had clicked when she saw him being hunted down by those Terran soldiers. Maybe it was because he reminded her of herself, in a way, alone, vulnerable, on the edge of being crushed by a universe that didn't care. She didn't even know what species he was, but she'd seen enough to know the Terran Empire didn't show mercy to their enemies, especially if they had something they wanted. The rumors about what they did to the Erlon people, torture, mutilation, genetic experimentation, made her sick to her stomach. The ship jerked to the side as a blast from one of the pursuing drones hit the rear shields. Alira swore again, punching the engine throttle. "Come on, girl. Just hold it together a little longer," she muttered, willing the ship to stay intact. The drone was closing in fast. She couldn't outrun them, not in this freighter. She needed to lose them another way. Her eyes darted across the display, searching for something, anything, that might give her an edge. The dense canyon formations ahead caught her attention. "Let's see how good your pilots really are," she whispered to herself, diving the ship hard into the jagged canyon below. The freighter screamed through the narrow rock formations, the wind shear rattling its hull as it wove through tight turns and sudden drops. Alira's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow as she pulled up just in time to avoid slamming into the canyon wall. The pursuing drones followed, but their larger size and less agile design forced them to widen their flight paths. Alira grinned despite herself. "That's right, try and catch me." Just as the drones rounded a corner, she flipped a switch on the console, releasing a small cache of decoy flares from the ship's underbelly. The drone's targeting systems locked onto the flares, mistaking them for the freighter, and in a brilliant explosion of light, they crashed into the canyon walls, shattering into pieces. Alira allowed herself a brief sigh of relief. "Guess I haven't lost my touch after all." But the relief was short-lived. She knew the Terran would send more than drones. Capital ships could be on their way, and this planet was crawling with enemy forces. She couldn't stay here. They needed to leave, and fast. As the ship leveled out of the canyon, Alira glanced at the navigation console, her mind racing for options. The nearby systems were either Terran-controlled or hostile. She didn't have a lot of places to run. Her gaze shifted back to the alien in the co-pilot seat. He stirred slightly, his large eyes fluttering open. For a moment he seemed disoriented, his gaze unfocused. Then his eyes met hers, and Alira felt a strange sensation wash over her, something between gratitude and desperation, but deeper, like a whisper directly into her thoughts. "Thank you for saving me." Alira froze, her hand hovering over the ship's controls. That voice, it hadn't come from his mouth. She looked at him, wide-eyed. "Did you just—" He nodded slowly, his expression weak but filled with urgency. "I don't have much strength left, but I need to show you something." Before Alira could respond, her vision suddenly blurred. A rush of images flooded her mind. Familiar places, strange symbols, and terrifying memories of destruction. She saw the lush forests of a beautiful world, the towering trees stretching into the sky, the shining rivers that sparkled under twin suns. And then she saw them, the Terran soldiers. They descended on the world like a plague, burning everything in their path. She felt the pain, the loss, the utter helplessness of being the last of your kind. And then, the vision shifted. She saw a map of the galaxy, pinpointing a distant location, a cluster of stars far beyond the known territories. A whisper echoed in her mind. The sanctuary worlds. Alira blinked, her head spinning as the images faded. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog in her mind. The sanctuary worlds, but those are a myth. The alien, Laru, as she now understood his name to be, coughed weakly, his voice faint. They exist. A place where the Terran cannot go. A refuge. We must find them. Alira hesitated, her thoughts racing. The sanctuary worlds, if they were real, were supposed to be hidden, legendary places untouched by the wars and conquests of the galaxy's empires. Stories of ancient worlds that offered protection to the oppressed, but no one had ever found them. Most people didn't believe they existed at all, but Laru believed, and right now, he was her only hope. She couldn't return to Earth. Bringing the Terran down on her homeworld wasn't an option, and she couldn't keep running forever. Her fingers hovered over the ship's nav computer. The sanctuary worlds, she murmured to herself. It was a long shot. No, more than that. It was insane. But what choice did she have? Laru's telepathic voice broke through her thoughts again. The Terran will come for me, for both of us. We must go now before they find us. Alira's heart pounded in her chest as she locked in the coordinates. It was a gamble, but everything about this was a gamble. She took a deep breath, her hands steadying on the controls. All right, sanctuary worlds it is. She initiated the ship's hyperdrive. The engines hummed, and the stars outside the cockpit stretched into long lines of light as the ship jumped into hyperspace. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the engines and Laru's labored breathing. Alira leaned back in her seat, her mind still reeling from everything that had just happened. She glanced over at Laru, who had slipped into an exhausted sleep. His body was weak, his condition worsening by the minute, but at least for now, they were safe. But Alira couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Terran Empire wasn't going to give up, and now she was tangled in something far bigger than she had ever imagined. She looked out at the endless expanse of space, her heart heavy with uncertainty. She didn't know what awaited them at the sanctuary worlds, or if they even existed. But one thing was clear, she couldn't turn back. With a deep breath, Alira closed her eyes, trying to calm the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. For better or worse, she had made her choice. And now, there was no going back. The stars outside the cockpit blurred into streaks of light as the freighter hurtled through hyperspace, leaving the dying world of Kura far behind. The hum of the ship's engines was a steady rhythm, but inside Alira Jones's head, her thoughts were anything but calm. She kept glancing at the alien beside her, Laru, the last of the Erlon, now resting uneasily in the co-pilot's seat. His delicate silver skin had taken on a dull, sickly tone, and every shallow breath he took made Alira's chest tighten with worry. "Hang in there, buddy," she murmured, not sure if he could hear her in his exhausted state. She pulled a worn blanket from the emergency kit and draped it over his fragile body. It was a small comfort, but it was all she could offer for now. Alira turned back to the ship's console, checking the nav coordinates she had entered. The freighter was heading toward a remote sector of the galaxy, far beyond known star charts, toward the sanctuary worlds. At least, that's what Laru believed. The sanctuary worlds, she thought, leaning back in her chair. What if they're real? What if they're not? She had always thought they were just stories, legends of hidden planets where the weak and the persecuted could find refuge, far from the clutches of empires like the Terran. A safe haven where even the most advanced warships couldn't follow. But no one had ever actually found them. Alira rubbed her temples. She had risked everything by coming this far, chasing a myth that might not even exist. But what else could she do? She couldn't stay within Terran-controlled space, not after what she'd done. The Empire had a long memory, and an even longer reach. The ship's proximity alert blinked on the dashboard, dragging her from her thoughts. Her fingers moved instinctively over the controls, adjusting the scanners. She had hoped that they'd shaken the Terran after the canyon chase on Kura, but something told her she wasn't that lucky. The proximity sensor beeped again, louder this time. Alira's heart sank as a cluster of red dots appeared on the screen. They found us. She swore under her breath, her hands flying over the controls. The hyperdrive was still active, but the Terran ships were closing in fast, too fast. Her mind raced as she tried to calculate the distance to their destination. We're still too far out. Alira's fingers trembled slightly as she switched the ship to manual override, slowing their speed just enough to pull them out of hyperspace. She needed to figure out who or what was tailing them, and if there was a way to lose them before they closed the distance. As the stars snapped back into focus, her stomach lurched. They had dropped into an empty stretch of space, far from any known star systems. The deep black void stretched endlessly in all directions, but the sudden, harsh ping of the scanner confirmed her worst fears. 3 Terran ships appeared on the scanner, already closing in fast. Their sleek, dagger-like shapes reflected the cold light of distant stars as they sliced through space toward her. These weren't the small Predator drones from before. These were fully armed Terran warships. Alira swallowed the rising panic in her throat. The freighter was no match for a direct confrontation. She had no weapons that could hold them off, and even if she tried to outrun them, the Terran ships were faster and far more agile. She glanced at Laru, who was still unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. He was relying on her, trusting her to keep him safe. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her like a boulder. With trembling hands, Alira activated the ship's comm system. "This is Alira Jones of the Starbreaker. To the approaching Terran vessels. You don't need to do this. I'm just a freighter pilot. I don't want trouble." The response came almost immediately, a cold, mechanical voice crackling through the comm. "Human vessel, you are harboring an enemy of the Terran Empire. Power down your engines and surrender the Erlin. Do so, and you will be spared." Alira's breath caught in her throat. She could hear the calm threat in their voice, as if they were already picturing her execution. They didn't really plan on letting her go. The Terran didn't leave loose ends. She muted the comm for a moment, leaning back in her seat. "Think, Alira, think." Running was no longer an option. Her ship wouldn't survive a battle, and there were no planets nearby to hide on. If the Terran boarded the ship, they would take LaRue and kill her. Or worse. She glanced at the navigation screen again. A new idea sparked in her mind, something desperate, but maybe just crazy enough to work. The sanctuary worlds were still out of reach. But in LaRue's visions there had been something, an anomaly, a gravitational distortion not far from here. Alira remembered the star map he had shown her telepathically, and she knew that whatever it was hidden from the Terran's charts. Maybe she could reach it. Maybe it was their last chance. Her hands flew over the controls, rerouting power to the engines and plotting a course toward the anomaly. It was a long shot, but she had no other choice. "Hold on, LaRue," she whispered. "I'm not letting them take you." The freighter's engines roared to life, and Alira pushed the ship to its limits, racing toward the anomaly. The Terran ships were right on her tail, their weapons locking onto the freighter as they closed in. A barrage of laser fire shot past them, narrowly missing the rear thrusters. The freighter shook violently under the force of the nearby explosions. Warning lights flashed across the dashboard, but Alira gritted her teeth and kept pushing forward. "There!" she shouted as the anomaly appeared on the screen, a swirling distortion in space like a ripple in the fabric of reality. It was unstable, unpredictable, but it was her only chance. The Terran ships were gaining, their weapons charging for another barrage. Alira knew they wouldn't miss this time. Her heart pounded in her chest as she accelerated toward the anomaly. "Come on, come on!" A final volley of laser fire slammed into the freighter, rocking the entire ship. Alira barely managed to keep control, her fingers gripping the controls so tightly they ached. The anomaly loomed ahead, growing larger as they approached. It was a swirling vortex of light and shadow, a chaotic storm of gravitational forces that made the hair on the back of Alira's neck stand on end. Without hesitating, Alira plunged the ship into the vortex. The freighter was immediately swallowed by the distortion, the ship's systems flickering wildly as it was pulled into the chaotic maelstrom. The Terran ships hesitated for a moment, their scanners unable to lock on to the anomaly's erratic readings. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the freighter vanished. Inside the cockpit, everything was a blur. Alira felt like she was being torn in every direction at once. The ship's alarms blared, the lights flickering on and off as they were tossed through the vortex. Her vision swam, and she could barely keep herself conscious as the gravitational forces pressed down on her from all sides. LaRue stirred beside her, his eyes fluttering open. "What is happening?" he asked, his telepathic voice weak but filled with confusion. "I don't know," Alira shouted, gripping the controls. "But whatever this is, it's better than being blown up by the Terran." The vortex spun around them, flashes of light and darkness swirling in chaotic patterns. Alira had no idea where they were going, or if they were going anywhere at all. She just held on, praying the ship would hold together long enough to get them through. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vortex spat them out. The freighter lurched forward and Alira's vision cleared. She blinked, looking out through the cockpit window. The black void of space had returned, but this time it was different. There was a strange calmness to the space around them, an eerie stillness that felt almost peaceful. Alira checked the scanners, her brow furrowing in confusion. The Terran ships were gone. The anomaly had vanished. And before them lay a star system, uncharted, unknown. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The system's planets glowed faintly with soft, warm light, their surfaces shimmering with the ethereal beauty of untouched worlds. "Is this?" Alira whispered, barely daring to believe it. LaRue sat up slowly, his eyes wide as he gazed out at the planets ahead. A sense of awe and relief washed over his face, and his voice trembled as he spoke telepathically. "The sanctuary worlds." Alira stared in disbelief. They had found it. The myth, the legend. It was real. They had made it. But as the freighter drifted toward the planets, Alira couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The freighter coasted quietly into the orbit of one of the planets in the newly discovered star system, the ship's engines finally quiet after the chaos of the anomaly. Alira's eyes were glued to the view outside the cockpit window, where the shimmering planet stretched below them like an unspoiled paradise. Lush green forests, crystalline blue oceans, and golden skies greeted her in a way that felt surreal after the cold, empty void of space. She turned to LaRue, who was sitting up in the co-pilot's seat, looking more alive than he had since they first met. His silver skin had regained some of its luster, and his breathing, while still shallow, was steadier. He gazed down at the planet with wide eyes, his expression a mix of awe and relief. "This is it," LaRue whispered telepathically, his voice filled with wonder. "The sanctuary worlds. We found them." Alira exhaled a shaky breath, allowing herself to relax for the first time in what felt like days. "I didn't think we'd actually make it." But as her heart settled, the questions started to creep in. The sanctuary worlds were real, but what now? What awaited them down there? Were they truly safe? Or was there something more dangerous waiting? Alira's thoughts were interrupted by the ship's scanners, which suddenly pinged with an alert. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she scanned the readout. There were no ships in the area, no signs of pursuit from the Terran or any other hostile force, but there was something strange, a faint energy reading coming from the planet below. "Looks like something's active down there," she said, frowning, "but it's faint, like an old beacon." LaRue didn't respond immediately, his eyes still locked on the planet's surface. He seemed to be listening to something far away, something Alira couldn't hear. Then he turned to her, his telepathic voice soft but clear. "There is a presence, something old, calling to me." Alira felt a chill run down her spine. "A presence? Like what?" LaRue closed his eyes, his brow furrowing as he concentrated. "I'm not sure, but I feel it, deep within. It is connected to my people. The Erlon once knew of these worlds, long before the Terran Empire rose. There is something down there, something important." Alira's heart skipped a beat. Something important wasn't exactly the reassurance she was looking for, but there was no turning back now. She couldn't leave LaRue, not after everything they had been through. Whatever was waiting on that planet, they had to face it. "All right," she said, tightening her grip on the controls. "Let's find out what this place is all about." She guided the ship into a slow descent, cutting through the planet's atmosphere with ease. The freighter glided over the shimmering oceans and dense forests, the landscape below untouched by war or industry. It was beautiful, almost too beautiful. The peace of it made Alira uneasy. They passed over towering mountains and wide plains before the ship's sensors picked up a stronger signal. In the middle of an overgrown jungle clearing, a structure appeared on the scanner. A massive temple-like building, ancient and crumbling but still intact. hidden beneath the forest canopy. That must be it, Alira muttered. She maneuvered the ship toward the clearing and set it down on a flat patch of grass just outside the temple ruins. The ship's landing gear hissed as it touched the ground, and for a moment, all was still. Alira unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up, stretching her legs after the long flight. "You ready for this?" she asked, glancing at LaRue. He nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We must go. I can feel the pull even stronger now. Something inside that temple is calling to me. I think it may hold the key to what the Terran wanted from my people." That piqued Alira's curiosity. "The key to your powers?" "Perhaps." She grabbed her pulse rifle from the rack by the door, not taking any chances. "Let's go then, but stay close. We don't know what's out there." Together, they descended the ramp of the freighter, stepping into the warm, humid air of the sanctuary world. The jungle around them was vibrant and alive, with the sounds of strange birds and rustling leaves filling the air. The ruins of the temple loomed ahead, covered in vines and moss, its once grand architecture worn by time. As they approached the entrance, Alira felt an odd pressure in the air, like the weight of 1,000 years of history pressing down on her. The stone doors of the temple were cracked and worn, but they still stood tall, imposing, and silent. LaRue stepped forward, his hand trembling as he touched the stone. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, a soft hum filled the air. The temple responded to him, the ancient stone glowing faintly beneath his touch. Alira took a step back, her pulse quickening. "What's happening?" LaRue didn't answer right away, his eyes closed as he concentrated, his body tense. "It's the memories of my people, locked away here for centuries. This place, it was built by the Erlon long ago, a sanctuary, but also a prison for something." The hum grew louder, vibrating in Alira's bones. The stone doors slowly creaked open, revealing a dark, cavernous interior lit by faint, glowing symbols along the walls. Alira hesitated for a moment, but then steeled herself and followed LaRue inside. The air inside the temple was cool and heavy, filled with the scent of old stone and something more, something ancient and powerful. The symbols along the walls pulsed gently, casting an eerie light over the narrow corridors. As they ventured deeper into the temple, Alira felt the pressure in her chest grow stronger, like an invisible force tugging at her mind. "What is this place?" she whispered, her voice echoing in the empty halls. LaRue's voice trembled slightly. "A place of power, a place where the Erlon once came to commune with something greater. But it was sealed long ago, after a terrible war. My people feared what they had awakened here." The hairs on the back of Alira's neck stood up. "Awakened? What do you mean?" LaRue stopped suddenly, his eyes wide with realization. "There is something alive here. But it's not a person. It's a force, a consciousness. It's been waiting for us." Before Alira could ask what he meant, they reached the heart of the temple, a massive chamber with a large, glowing stone at its center. The stone pulsed with a deep, rhythmic energy, its light filling the room with an otherworldly glow. LaRue stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the stone. "This is it, the source of my people's power. The Terran wanted this, but they could never unlock it." Alira felt the air around them shift, a deep, low hum vibrating through the chamber. The energy in the room was almost suffocating now, pressing down on her with an intensity she had never felt before. Suddenly, LaRue collapsed to his knees, clutching his head in pain. Alira rushed to his side, panic rising in her chest. "LaRue, what's happening?" "It's inside me," LaRue gasped, his voice filled with fear. "The Terran planted something in my mind, something to corrupt this place." Alira's heart raced. The Terran hadn't just been hunting LaRue. They had implanted a mental virus, something designed to destroy the very power they sought. And now, it was waking up. "Fight it, LaRue," she shouted, grabbing his shoulders. "You can do this." But the force inside him was strong, too strong. LaRue's mind was being overwhelmed, his connection to the ancient power of the Erlon twisting and warping under the influence of the Terran's corruption. Without thinking, Alira reached out, placing her hand on LaRue's forehead. She had no idea what she was doing, but she felt a surge of determination. She had saved him once before. She wasn't going to lose him now. Her mind connected with his, plunging her into the storm of thoughts and emotions swirling inside LaRue's consciousness. She could feel the darkness, the Terran's virus wrapping around his mind like a parasite, suffocating his thoughts, poisoning the ancient power within him. Alira gritted her teeth, pushing back against the corruption with everything she had. She didn't have LaRue's telepathic abilities, but she had something else, her will. She fought against the darkness, clawing her way through the storm, reaching for LaRue's core. For what felt like hours, she battled the virus, her mind straining under the weight of the ancient power and the Terran's corruption. But slowly, bit by bit, she pushed the darkness back, unraveling its hold on LaRue's mind. Finally, with one last mental push, the corruption shattered. LaRue gasped, his body trembling as the darkness lifted. Alira collapsed beside him, her body drenched in sweat, her mind reeling from the effort. "You did it," LaRue whispered, his voice weak but filled with gratitude. Alira nodded, too exhausted to speak. She had done it. Somehow, she had saved him. Again. The stone in the center of the chamber pulsed softly, its energy now calm and peaceful. The ancient power of the Erlon had been restored, freed from the Terran's corruption. LaRue stood slowly, his strength returning. He looked down at Alira, his eyes filled with awe. "You saved me, and you saved this place, thank you." Alira managed a weak smile, her heart swelling with relief. "Just part of the job." As they left the temple, the weight that had pressed down on them inside lifted, replaced by a sense of calm and hope. The sanctuary worlds had been found, and LaRue was free from the Terran's grasp. But as they looked out over the untouched beauty of the planet, Alira knew that their journey wasn't over. The Terran Empire wouldn't stop hunting them. And now, with the ancient power of the Erlon restored, the fight was only beginning. Together, they would face whatever came next. And this time, they were ready.